Fair enough. All right. So welcome everybody. This is episode 21 of Storycomic Presents. And I have here with us, we're going to have a wonderful conversation with Reagan Jackson. Reagan Jackson is a poet, podcaster, and children's book author. Faring now that you're out there on the West Coast in Seattle. So thank you for it's well into the afternoon where you are there. So I'll tell you what we're in the future here. So 7 p.m. everything's still fine. So
well, I'm glad I'm going to live till 7. It's good. I like these guarantees.
Yeah. So before we get started, I want everybody to kind of get to know you a little bit and just kind of give everybody a bit of background on how you got into writing, and then after that we'll talk a bit about some of your poetry and some of your children's books. So
okay.
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, backing up though, I'm also the program director for Young Women Empowered. So this is all like in my ample spare time. When I'm not running a nonprofit. Yes, I am writing. I'm painting. I'm creating. Basically, I started writing. I knew I wanted to be a writer before I could actually read. And so that's the story that my mom tells, is like that all of the things that were all the things that she read about kids were like, oh, if you read to your kids, it's going to encourage them to want to read, and it's going to encourage them to, do all this stuff. But for me, like, I don't like redundancy. So since she was a person who read to me, I just assumed that that's how life was going to be for the rest of our lives. And like, she was the reader and I was the recipient of her reading, and that was enough. And she was like, no, like, I need you to learn how to read. And I was real like uninterested, because I'm like, why would I do that? You already know how to read. Like, I'm in the collective, like, I'm doing my part. So she says, she told me, well, if you want to become a writer, you have to learn how to read, because that's the thing that writers know how to do. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm already a writer, so I'll learn how to read. But yeah, so I guess that's it. It's something that I've always done. It's something that I've always loved. I love storytelling. I love reading. I love language. And I think that's partly too why I'm like interested in so many different genres. It was never about a specific genre for me. It was just about expression.
And so you have in your library, you have some books on poetry. You've also done a lot of essays, and also, as we say, there's some children's books that you've published. What was that jumping off point for you on what you decided to when you decided to do first, and then from there, what did you? I guess the question is, was it the mood you're in to just kind of decide of what you're going to do first, or what was it that
oh yeah,
the transition, like how did you decide to do this first and then not say poetry or children's books first? Or
well, actually, I feel like a lot of it was kind of simultaneous. Like, I'm a person who's just like, I'm always just kind of doing a thing. And so whatever gets finished first is like, it might get published first, but I was probably working on something else at the same time. So for example, I wrote several novels when I was a kid that will never be published, because they're, me still trying to figure out how to like write novels. And then I became really interested in poetry because it was so much shorter and so much more manageable than novels. So I was like, oh yeah, I love this. I can finish a poem. Like, novels take forever. But yeah, I'd say about 2008, I went to the Seattle Poetry Slam and fell in love with slam poetry. And then that became a thing where, like, during that whole year, I decided I was going to go to the slam at least once a month and do a thing that most poets don't do, which is to write new shit for every single slam. And so by the end of the year, I had a book. It was not my intention to write a book. It was literally just my intention to write a poem and win the slam, which I didn't do until way later, although I wrote lots and lots of poems. But yeah, and so at a certain point, since I've been that person who has, like, I've been carrying around a notebook since I was a kid, my mom was like, are you ever gonna like do anything with all this writing? Like you just write all the time and then nothing happens. And I was like, oh, snap. So I put it all together, and that was God, Hair, Love in America, my first book of poetry. Um, I it was literally just a gift for my mom for Christmas. And I ran into a friend who was into self-publishing. And so she like was like, oh, I just taught a tutorial on this. Like, let me sit you down and we'll just like do this together. And so she walked me through that process, and I loved it because I got to make all of the decisions about, the cover, the page numbers, or, like just how to like how does the formatting look, or what kind of graphics, or, things like that. And um, I always thought that I would go mainstream, and then someone would be like making most of those decisions for me, and I would just have to like suck it up if I didn't like it. And so it felt really empowering to be like, no, like, I don't think that this book is going to sell a whole bunch of copies, but I'm going to do it exactly the way I want it. So, I know whoever is reading it is reading what I intended.
Yeah, and it's amazing to think about. Is that I remember listening to somebody was talking about before. It's that it is the the book world is inundated with so many books right now, but it's so accessible for anyone now, and that's the good part. But as you mentioned earlier, on the flip side is that people who want to write and publish nowadays have to learn how to design a book cover, how to do all that stuff now, and it makes it does make it a bit more kind of a jack of all trades point, where you kind of have to kind of decide that, or if you have, as you say, if you don't have a publisher to actually do that on your behalf. But you do, as you say, you do have that freedom to make the book that you want it to look like. So is that in that first book that you held up, God, Hair, Love in America,
Mm-hmm.
is that your art on the cover?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And
Yeah, all of it. So the
okay.
cover, and then inside there's like a couple of like little graphics and stuff, and I did all of that too. And I don't know, for me, like, yeah, you do kind of have to learn how to do everything, but also you don't have to. Like, you can just meet somebody who does all of that. That's my hack that I learned from starting a podcast, because everybody like gave me this intense advice to like become an audio engineer, and I'm like, I just want to talk. Like, I don't want to do that. So yeah, that felt like a bit of a barrier for me, actually. In terms of starting a podcast, I would have started one 6 months sooner if I'd have known that I'd have to become an audio engineer first. And what ended up happening was I just gave up and was like, okay, what am I good at? I'm good at community organizing. I know somebody whose joy it would be to like figure out my sound challenges and like edit my shit, because it's not my joy.
Right.
I want to
So, and so you came out with, so that was your first book, God, Hair, Love in America. And then your second book, because you also have two other books of poetry that you put out, Love in Guatemala and Summoning Unicorns.
Yes.
Now, where do they fit into the time? Was that did you have them come out after or before your children's books?
I think it went God, Hair, Love in America, then Coco La Swish 1, then Summoning Unicorns, then Coco La Swish 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere in between there, I also did an anthology called GV the Poetry with.
Oh, wow.
So with the second one, basically, like when I finished the first book, which was God, Hair, Love in America, of course, as I'm like in this process, I'm still writing. And so it's like kind of this, like, when is the cutoff? Like, I'm like, oh, I just wrote 3 really good poems. Like, I want them to be in that book that I just published and I can't take it back. So I was like, okay, well, maybe that's, seeds for the next book. So with like Love in Guatemala, this came from, it's like a hybrid between poetry that I wrote in Guatemala and then like some love poetry, and then there's like one really random story in the middle, because when you're self-publishing, you can do what you actually want to do and not what other people think makes sense. But yeah, like what came up for me through the process of taking youth to Guatemala as a part of my work when I was a program manager for Global Visionaries was that a lot of our youth who were introverted were having challenges like speaking up in the circle, like in our circle discussion. So you get like the same like 10 kids speaking the whole time. And so I wanted to integrate writing into our work together as a way for them to process. And what I discovered is it was highly effective. We got way more, we got complete participant engagement through adding this in. And then some youth shared that would never have shared if they didn't have the opportunity to like write it down first. And then by the end of it, we did like five separate workshops over the course of 2 trips with 40 kids in each trip. So like 80 people writing poetry, like, or writing, you know, essays or writing whatever they're going to write like 5 times throughout the experience. It's more than a book. I mean, yeah. So, and then I worked with kids. That became like a whole other project where I worked with them to learn how to do the process for themselves. And they became the editors, and they like one of the kids did all the cover art, and another one did all the formatting. It was really cool.
And that's a brand new book that's out then.
Oh no, this is old.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was I don't know. 2010-ish.
Okay.
Yeah. So these ones came out like pretty soon after God, Hair, Love in America. And then with Coco Swish, that I wrote this as a poem when I was teaching. I used to teach 4th and 5th grade Spanish at Meridian School. It was super cute. And as a part of like being in community with kids, like we'd have like a Friday morning assembly, like Friday morning meetings. And what I was noticing is that there are a lot of kids who were being kind of ostracized for being different. And so, yeah, I wrote it as a poem, and I shared it at an assembly just to youth and their parents. And one of the parents afterwards, like with tears in her eyes, came up to me and was like, "You need to make this into a children's book." And I was like, yeah, sure. But I also like had no idea how to do that. Like, I just didn't know how. But she like was really tenacious. And so she, not only would she keep reminding me, she was like, "I really want you to do this," but she'd also like, she bought me her favorite children's book, you know, as like inspiration. Is really beautiful. But yeah, it's funny because it took me like, I don't know, a couple hours to write the poem and then 5 years to figure out how to turn it into a book, because I was really self-conscious about my art, honestly. And I was looking for somebody to illustrate it for me. I didn't want to be the one to do that. And I just didn't find the right person. And I didn't find, it just wasn't coming together until finally I was like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna do this. So that was like a crazy process though. It's just drawing lots of fish for one thing, because I was like, I can draw like, I don't know, I can draw one thing, but I don't know if I can draw the same way, you know, which I think is kind of a core component to most illustrations. It's like, it's recognizable as the same thing. And then I realized like, I actually don't like drawing. I really only like to paint and collage. And I was like, can I do that? Like, I hadn't really seen like I've seen like watercolors, or I've seen like pastel drawings, but I'd never seen like what I was quite looking for. So it was a journey. And that came out in like 2013 or so.
Right.
And that's, you know, I feel like it's super basic.
Right.
But then I was like, it's a kid's book. Like, they're not going to care. It's me. I'm the one who's stopping this process.
And I know, and I would say too, which is that you brought up something that's I think it's a good realization for our viewers and our listeners, is that it's almost in the same family of writing, and I could be way off about poetry and children's books, depending on the children's books, because there is a rhythm and a cadence that's put into that. As you say, it's that, and I'd be curious to see how many poems that have been, or even song lyrics that someone easily turns it into a children's book. And I did notice that when I was telling you before we went on the air, that I did read Coco Le Swish to my I can say it, Coco Le Swish. Reading it is easy, but saying Le Swish is hard. Okay. There was a cadence to it. There was a really good rhythm to it. It flowed. It was poetry. And what I love about your illustrations that you put into it, as you say, it's collage and painting on there, that it is immediately recognizable and relatable to children, because it's completely reminiscent of going into an elementary school art classroom to see that. And so it's to say that it's something that kids can actually even make that into like a project, to say, hey, let's draw some pictures, let's do our own collage of fish, of Coco Le Swish. What do we learn from that? And the messaging behind the second book of I think was really powerful, and it's something that children can relate to. Do you want to talk briefly about what how between I would say the difference between poetry and children's book is that that with a children's books model, you have to have a message at the end that a child can relate to. So what would you say that you mentioned is your two books? So what was the messaging that you put in behind there?
Ooh, well, for Coco Le Swish, A Fish from a Different Rainbow, the first one, the message was just, it's okay to be who you are, period. Whoever you are. If you have fabulous rainbow scales, if you have like a swishy tail, it's cool. And it just addresses like hater fish specifically, because that's a real experience, not just, in life, but especially in school. I watch little kids ostracize other little kids. And I was like, I can't believe how early this is all happening. And, there's only so much intervention that I think adults can actually do. At a certain point, this is kind of a universal experience, and all youth, I think, are going to have to deal with it. And at a certain point, they're going to need to have that develop some inner strength. And as for the second one, the sequel, so
Coco Le Swish 2.
When rainbows go blue. And also, I do think you have to look at both books, because I leveled up in terms of my illustrations for the second one. I think it helped, to have more of a sense of oh, okay, this is what it can be. But yeah, Coco Le Swish When Rainbows Go Blue was about the fact that in most school situations, when you ask kids how they are, there's two responses. You're either I'm fine or I'm good. Those are the two things that you can be. And anything outside of that is pulling focus from the class. So your rage, your sadness, your depression, your exuberance, schools don't want that. And I found that to be incredibly challenging, because it was counterintuitive for me working as an educator. I wanted to know how kids really were. And when I made the space for that, I felt like that's when we were making a lot of connections. And because of the way that our systems are set up, there are not a lot of people who are making space for that. And so sometimes kids who are particularly emotional think that they're crazy, or just repress, and then it comes out in really inappropriate and awful ways. So I wanted to tell the story of someone who wasn't okay. Coco becomes both physically and metaphorically blue, and then kind of goes about trying to solve the problem of what do you do when you're sad, and sometimes there's not a really clear solution. And I wanted that to come up too, because I think Disney lies to us and they tell us that we can solve problems in 30 minutes, and it's just not true. Like, I mean, sometimes it's true if it's a really easy to solve problem, but if it's more complicated, like, like you have to sit with it.
And also too, to be fair, is that if you can kind of figure out how people feel by the kind of songs they sing too. So in Disney.
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. And if you're in music class, that works out. But if you're trying to like get a Bollywood musical out of your math class, like you're gonna go to the principal's office. Like, that's your feelings. Like,
wait, was he just singing a villain song? Wait a minute, I know you.
I'm a villain.
Is there, and also too, that I noticed that was that the point of it, what would you say is the kind of the age range for Cocos Swish?
I have my librarian friend categorize that because I actually don't know. I'm like that adult that's like watching cartoons and stuff. So I'm like, it's every age. Like, if you can read, you can read this. But I think it's like second grade, something like that, second or third grade.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was it? Was it deliberate to put it? I mean, I guess how deliberate would be of having, what's the hidden message behind the fact that Cocos Swish has to go to people older than her to ask how to fix this? And then in the end, it turns out that, well, I don't want to give away the end. Never mind.
Spoiler alert. I'm like, if I answer the question, am I going to ruin the ending? I don't know. Yeah, I think in thinking through Coco's journey, I thought about like, what are the things that you do when you're problem solving? And for a lot of like young people, it is going to your elders or like that, these are the resources. But I like the idea too of the fact that like the elders sometimes were helpful and sometimes we're not. Like.
Yeah, it was like the equivalent of, I don't know, go ask your mom. Like, yeah.
Yeah, the fish version of that. Like.
So you were the illustrator and the author of the book. So my question, I want to kind of get into some technicalities for you, because we do have a lot of people that listen to this that are wanting to make books or in the process of that, but they want to get down to that. So what was the process behind you sitting down for, specifically about for instance, the second book? Because as you say, the first book was, the inspiration of putting in that poem. So you already had that written out. Two questions in one. First, why did you decide that you needed to make a sequel? And two, how did you script that out?
Ooh, granted, the writing for the second book, I think, took way longer than the writing for the first book that I didn't know was going to be a book. So that's one thing. It's like, you kind of have to get over your own self-consciousness at a certain point and just like actually write. The ideas in the same way as the first book just came through kids, like watching their behavior, watching how they interact, and trying to use use storytelling as a way to connect with them or to get them to think through more deeply. These different issues. So like in my mind, this is actually all like, I think that Cocos Swish will have a third book, and then that'll be the completion of the series. In my mind, I see it already. It's like in yellow, and it's Cocos Swish, a bird and a fish.
Oh.
And, it's about relationships. But in terms of like the actual process, because the first one was a poem and I wrote it in verse and I wrote it with rhyme, I wanted to do that with the second one as well. But it was a lot longer, like the story is just a lot longer. So I was like, can I really like rhyme this whole time? Yes, it turns out I can. And then what I did with the first one was I put it in a Word document and I separated out the pages, because of course, when you just write it, it's all in a block, it's all in a brick. Like, so you have to like read through and just figure out like how much text is okay on one page. And then once you decide that, you can decide like, okay, well, what's the picture to that text? So actually there's a book that, this is so funny. There's a book in between these two books, which is actually, it's the same text from Coco the Swish, A Fish from a Rainbow, but I met this tattoo artist who I love, who read Coco the Swish and loved it so much, he drew a picture of Coco, and that was like a hybrid of Coco and his daughter, like a little portrait. And I loved it so much, I decided to work with him to do a second version of Coco the Swish, which is a coloring book, an activity pack with like a crossword and a word find. It's just so much fun. But yeah, like, so working with him as well, like, I just had to like break it down step by step. And I'm a really visual person. So it also like, it helped me to do a lot of tester drawings. Like, what is Coco? Like, what does she look like? What are all the ways? So I actually have a whole stack. I should have brought them, but they're in the closet somewhere, of like beta Cocos, like of all different, like, it's kind of a cool thing.
And so you sat down, so you separated it all out into different pages.
Mm-hmm.
And did you then, from there, did you kind of sketch out on what you wanted the image to look like? And
kind of, I don't do rough drafts in that way. Like, I just go for it. So like, once I know, like, okay, this I'm doing a picture for this painting or for this set of text, I would just kind of go for it. And then I literally, like, I got paper that was the size of the book that I wanted. I wanted 8x8, and I just did them like that. And then I like scanned them in and integrated them into the text.
And as, yeah, it was, talking earlier about it, it's like it's painting / collage type work, and so you kind of had an idea in your head of what the image was going to look like for each page. And how long did it take you to create all of those pieces of art, basically?
Oh my gosh, it took forever. It was so long. I mean, yes and no. Like literally, I just feel like it took so long for me to even figure out how to like make a book. But then the second time, like once I had figured it out, I would say it was maybe like a month and a half of doing this. Because once I'm like in it, once I'm in the process, like I get really super focused. So it's like, okay, I'm going to work, and then when I get back, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. So I'll be like late into the night, like working on these paintings.
And so you had these paintings, you scanned them into your computer, had them laid out. All right. And somebody who's watching or listening would say, all right, I got that. I'm ready to go. I have no idea what to do. I have something together in a Word document. Reagan, what's the next step? How do I actually hold this book in my hands?
I call like paper, like page breaks, section breaks, page numbers. Like that's a whole last step, because it takes so much longer than you could ever possibly imagine to figure out how to like make the page number start at the page number you want. I know that sounds really stupid, but really, like, yeah, call a friend, get support on that. Because that's the kind of stuff that makes you insane. I used a service that's no longer technically in existence called CreateSpace, which is like a subsidiary of the evil and dreaded Amazon.
Okay, it's Kindle Direct now. Right.
Yeah, Kindle Direct. So I don't know if it's still as user friendly as it was. Yeah, I don't know. At the time, it was just so easy, because once you made a free account, you could look at different book sizes, because that was a thing too, was like, and that's a thing to note if you're working on self-publishing a book. you want to make sure that you are able to publish in a way that if a library wants it or if a bookstore wants to sell it, like it's not a weird size or difficult to print. So they had several like blank templates that also helped with sizing things. So I went in and I like downloaded the blank template for the 8x8 book. And then I was like, okay, so then I like transferred what I had done in my little Word document into the one that actually fits the size, you know. So definitely like little nitpicky things like that are really helpful. And then once I also like, I'm a big fan of editors because I think when you spend so much time on your work, like you want it to really shine and you don't want there to be like typos and shit. So it's really helpful, I think, if you have somebody else look at the work and line up, you know, like once your eyes are blurry and you can't see like that things are out of whack, like somebody else can like help you with that.
Right. And did you have, so did you have a friend help you with that editing part?
Yeah, my friend Lori, she's actually been, I want to say the first reader for every book except for the last 3 that I just wrote this year. But yeah, she's been incredible in that way.
Well, and also though that your children's books are in color, and if you're self-publishing, if so, that's print on demand. So it's probably that's I know that people have talked to in the past is that the color versions are actually way more expensive to make than compared to the black and white versions.
Well, and that was also kind of what I was testing out with doing the coloring book version, because it is like $3 cheaper. Like, you know, it's like way easier to do it that way than it was to do the full color version. Like they are my most expensive books. Like Cocos Fishman, the second one, is the most expensive book for me to buy and then resell. But people also buy it. Like that's the thing about it. It works because it pays for itself.
Right. Yeah. And so is there anything that other parts of your poetry, because we talked about that, and now you know, getting into talking about your third poetry book that came out, Summoning Unicorns.
Oh yeah, that's actually my favorite. Yeah. So this one. Yeah, this was kind of it was a bit of a challenge for me in that what in addition to like doing all this writing and doing all this other stuff, like a couple of things. One, I'm also an award-winning journalist. Like, so, you know, in my other like 5 minutes a day, this whole time, like from about 2013 on, I was writing a regular column and yeah, so that was a thing. But what I've noticed in terms of the uses of my writing is that a lot of it is a catharsis, and it's something that I'm doing it to process something, or I want to communicate a very specific thing. And then with my art, it's just like a meditation, and it's very joyous, and I just sit. And so I had a friend who had been reading my writing, like my very serious writing, and then came to my art show and was like, what is this? Like, cause it's like all these colors and like bubbles and da da da. And like, for him, it was really difficult for him to square my personality, because he's like, I'm used to you being like the angry Reagan or like the precise Reagan. I'm not used to this like fluffy side. And so with Summoning Unicorns, I feel like it was my first attempt at being a bit more balanced. So I have intentionally, like, I wrote poems when I was really happy and joyous or excited or goofy, or, you know, like I wanted to have more of a full range rather than just sad or angry, or, you know, not to say that those are like that's an, I don't want to invalidate my own emotional experience. Like this shit all comes from somewhere. But
Well,
I
yeah,
just
Coco Swish taught you that it's okay to have different feelings, right?
right. I mean, I'm learning as we go. Like,
Wow. And so that was basically, so Summoning Unicorns is would you say more of like a lighter collection of poetry?
funny, yes and no. I think I just think it's a more balanced. because there's definitely like some hard-hitting shit in there too.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
And that's your latest poetry book that's come out so far.
Yes, although I do have I have some stuff in this that just came out, Black
Oh,
Imagination.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, so this is it's an anthology curated by Natasha Marin, and I've got 3 pieces in there. So she is an experiential artist who's based out here in Seattle, and I actually didn't know I was going to be in a book until until the book was done. And I kind of, and they like then asked retroactively for consent, and I was like, oh, okay. But she had asked the question, what is your origin story? How do you heal yourself? Describe or imagine a world where you're loved, safe, and valued. Just those 3 questions. And she asked a whole bunch of Black people, and we all like wrote our responses, and then she compiled it, and it became a thing.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that just came out this year. That's with McSweeney Press, and it was really cool because it's becoming a thing. Like we just there was like a story on PBS about it like last week, and I was like, yeah, I'm in that.
And is that like an essay that you've written, or is that a poetry in that one?
It's a little bit of a hybrid. I'd say it's like a poetic essay. Like, it's one of the things like I didn't expect that this was going anywhere. I was literally just asking or answering a question for a friend. Um,
And then you also have Emerald Reflections is another anthology that you have some
yeah.
poetry in.
Yeah, I forgot about that. There was 2 of those. Um, and I'm in both of them. And then there's another one that same journalist, Marcus Harrison Green, put out called Flight of the Assemblies. And that came out after 45 was elected. And it was like an essay I did about fear and fighting back.
Mm, wow. And you have, and you, so, oh yeah, Fly to the Assemblies. Yeah, that was another one. So you have, uh, so talking about your process, uh, so you said, you have a pretty, full day job. Where do you find time? Because also, people are going to be asking, I come home, I'm exhausted. How do you find that time to continuously be putting out? You're talking about that. You have, close to over a dozen books that you've published that are in
Right.
now. So
Yeah, since the last time I saw you, Barney.
yeah.
What is
There's
that?
like people have like entire bookshelves of just Reagan Jackson. So
I do.
yeah. So talk about the time. How do you find the time or in the energy? Because there has to be like a substantial amount of energy to kind of close things off and sit down and start writing.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. One is I don't write every single day. So that's something I know like a lot of I felt at times like shamed by other writers who were like, I write every day. And I want to like say that that's great if you do write every day, like much respect to you. And if you're a person who can't do that for whatever reason, or you just don't have it in you at that moment, that's okay. And that doesn't mean that you're not a writer. Like for many years, I was a writer that didn't write, like most of grad school, honestly. If it wasn't a term paper, I wasn't writing it. But at a certain point, a couple of things happen. One is like the inspiration hits and the idea is so good that I follow that. So for example, like what I do last week, I like launched a 60-person summer camp. I like started this like big healing circle thing or whatever, but I also wrote 3,000 words because there was a story that I wanted to tell, or I wanted to process with folks. And it just was like, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was like 4 a.m. and it's like it was writing itself. So I was just like, well, I just have to get up and do what I can do. And then by midday, I had my first draft.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and so I guess like that's a lot of how writing works for me. I also find it comforting to write. So during this time, during the pandemic, particularly, my life has greatly narrowed down in terms of my social stuff, like who I can see, who I can't see, how far we have to stand apart, like, you know, what time I'm working, like da da da. So during this time, like, I've just kind of focused on having like doing my work stuff at a certain period of time in the day, and then the rest of it is time for writing. Um, and it's been good. It's been productive. I wrote a novel in the month of April. That was great. Um,
And so how does that, how do you usually sit down in front of a computer, or are you scratch it out on notepads? Do you have post-it notes all over the place, or do you just have that one laptop or that one computer you open up and put it out there like that?
yep, just open up my computer and go.
Yeah.
If I'm like sometimes for shorter things like for poetry or whatever, I might take a notebook and go someplace in nature. But for the most part, I'm like at some kitchen table somewhere, my kitchen or someone else's kitchen. Um, I don't know why a kitchen is a good place to write, but it is.
Okay, maybe because there's like vibrant energy about a kitchen, because there's always movement and there's always something happening there that it's kind of like easy to, jump in. It's like difference between being in like a still pond or a, or a
Close to the
slow
wine.
moving river. Yeah, close to the wine. There you go. And do you have as is there any types of programs that you recommend for writers to use, like any outlining programs or any type of writing, you just Word document, you just
Yeah, I'm super basic on stuff like that. I don't do anything. I like y'all can recommend something to me, like, like, but I'll be in this Word document, like it's 1997.
do you have and so what are some of the advice and recommendations that you would give to um, uh, writers who are starting to write? What are some of the things that you wished you knew, 10 years ago before you started?
Hmm. Um, just start where you are and do what you can. I think um, a lot of my biggest roadblocks have been self-inflicted, and it's been me feeling, I'm not. This isn't what Toni Morrison would have written, and then being like, "What was me? I'm a shit writer, like whatever." And then I don't know, like I have to just kind of let it go. Like, no, like I'm not gonna write what she wrote. That was her job. Like I'm only gonna be able to write what I write. And if I spend all my time like comparing myself to other people and their genius, like I'm never gonna actually figure out what mine is. And I think also like the more you write, the easier it becomes. Definitely read when you write and read in the genres that you're writing in, because I feel like that is really helpful, just to soak in the cadence of how language works. Um, yeah, like you have to read as much as you write, I think, in order to be any good at it. But also like just taking the pressure off. Like sometimes you can just write and it doesn't have to be good. Like it just is. And drafts. Like I love drafts because if you messed it up the first time, you can fix it. But if you don't do it the first time, then you have nothing to fix. Like you don't even have anything to work with. Like, so the most important part is just to do it. It's just to write.
And when you were writing the children's books, what were some of the books that you were reading at the time that you used that helped inspire you?
I actually, I went back into the box of my old children's books. Like I have like boxes of books that my mom gave, and like it's interesting to like look at your old stuff. One, it just kind of gave me so much more. I feel like my relationship with my parents has improved dramatically as I've become an adult, because I can see like how much care they put into everything that they gave me. Like even in the books, like um, I have like Ezra Jack Keats, Pet Shop, and The Snowy Snowy Day is really beautiful, and one called Arrow to the Sun, which is probably like in the like 0.1% of books that are children's books that cover like Native American culture. You know, like I don't actually know where my mom found these books. um, but there's like, when I was looking at them, all of the art is so completely different from one another, um, that kind of gave me more courage to be like, oh, I don't actually like, there isn't one way to do this thing. I can do it the way I want to do it, and that's a valid expression, not a cop out.
And what about like your books of poetry? What are some of your some of your favorite inspirational poets that you like to read?
Ooh, Mindy Nettifee, Rise of the Trust Fall. Um, that's my shit right there. That book, like, it really was a game changer for me. And then Chisala Upile's Soft Magic, Anastasia Renee's Forget It. I really love that one. And my godfather gave me a copy of 3,000 years of Black poetry. Um, and it's an anthology, and it has like a lot of like Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks, and you know, like, so I don't know, I've been reading poetry for a long time. Like,
3,000 years. It must be a pretty big book.
it's a tome. Yeah.
And so what's coming up next then? You showed us the book that was just published, and you mentioned that you're working on
Yeah.
a third Coco Swish. How is that coming along?
Not very well, which is okay. Like, I'll get to it later. I feel like there's certain things that pull me sooner than others. So I think Coco, like, that third book is going to take a while. But this year, I finished 3 books. So one is a young adult fiction novel that I've been working on since about 2011. And then off and on, because I feel like it's not like I've been steady about it. It's like, and then I work on it for like a month and then get stuck, and something would happen. I'd travel, and then I'd come back to it like 2 years later. So it's not like a continuous thing. But I finished. I did a book. It's called Still Here. It's gonna come out by Minerva Labs, which is a new publishing press by my friend Michael Main. But yeah, Still Here, a South End mixtape from an unexpected journalist. So that's like it's a part memoir of my experience as a journalist, and then mixed with an anthology of some of my articles. And then I wrote a romance novel based on COVID called Worth the Risk.
Oh,
Hey.
wow.
Because why not? Mostly just because my girlfriends were bored and I was entertaining them. And what started out as me like sending them like a couple of pages a day ended in 50,000 words in a novel.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what's cooking. I'm looking currently for a literary agent because I'm at a place where I'd love to like work in a team.
Right.
It's fun to like do all the stuff on my own, but I think it would also be really fun to like have someone else take over some of it and market it and get it out there more.
Right. Wow. Okay. So you got like 3 books in the hopper then right now.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
if you want, I'll read you like the first couple of pages of Still Here.
yes. Let's hear it.
Okay. And then it starts with an Audre Lorde quote, which is, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive." I have long felt the crushing weight of the strange paradox of being both invisible and hypervisible as a Black woman in America. The need to process my experiences has kept me coming back to writing. Though I have been a writer for the majority of my life, I didn't see a place for myself in journalism. In the early 1900s, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about the theory of double consciousness in his book, The Souls of Black Folk. He posited that being Black and being American is to look at the world with 2 understandings: that of the white mainstream lens and that of our own cultural perspective. It is this double consciousness that made me skeptical and critical of journalism for the ways it has been used as a tool of systemic oppression to vilify and misrepresent people of color. But it is also what positioned me well to become a counter narrative. I was introduced to Sarah Studeville, Jessica Partnow, and Alex Stonehill, the co-founders of the Seattle Globalist, in 2013. We met over brunch at the home of my friend, media justice activist Sabrina Roach. Sabrina introduced me as a person who liked to write and someone passionate about study abroad. I fell into a rant about the ways in which people of color are excluded from study abroad programs and how the white solution is to mistake color for economic status and throw money at the problem. Yes, money is sometimes one obstacle that people of color face in making the decision to study abroad, but we are always making a way out of no way, finding scholarships, hosting spaghetti dinners, or circulating GoFundMe pages. The challenges that go unmentioned are the fact that many of these programs were not designed with us in mind. I told the story of the Black girl who went to South Africa on a study abroad program only to arrive at a white homestay with a family that had a dog that was trained to bite Black people. There is a global misconception, often perpetuated by white media, that the US is still a white country. Still, what kind of negligence exists that a university would send a student to an unsafe environment? What if that student had been white? Would it have been acceptable for them to stay in a home with people who harbored such hatred? What would they have learned about South Africa? I shared my own experience of being Black in Spain on a predominantly white program and the microaggressions I experienced both in the group of my peers and in the host country itself. Alex turned to me and said, "That sounds interesting. You should write about it." I had unwittingly pitched my first story. I went home, wrote a couple of pages, and emailed it to him. To my surprise, he published it with minimal edits and sent me a check. Like millions of people, I had a blog. I was also a contributor to the Black Girl Nerds blog. I had written 2 articles in high school, one that published in the Madison Times and the other in the Capital Times. But the process never felt quite so official. After my first article, I followed up with another, and within a few months, they offered me a column. When I told my dad I was going to be a reporter, the first thing he said was, "Don't be that asshole who sticks the microphone in the face of the person who just lost their kid." His words challenged me to think critically about the role of journalist. We tell the facts. We report what happened, but so much of what has been written about my community has been narrated by people from outside of it, with no context to understand the facts enough to even articulate the full truth. I wanted to tell stories from my community, but never at their expense. Through years of conditioning by white media, we have been taught that journalism is sensational, concise, and didactic, and should be narrated without emotion or bias. That is not who I wanted to be or how I wanted to write. I needed to create a new paradigm of ethics. I have biases, lots of them, and opinions and perspectives, and I didn't want to leave them out, but rather use them to reframe the news. I wanted to tell more complete stories, to create a space for nuance and balance, authenticity and perspective. Could I do this? Could I be the journalist that didn't lose myself or my voice? There was no guarantee that this was possible. I had no roadmap. But the Globalist was new too, just barely 6 months off the ground. The PI had closed its doors. The Seattle Times seemed to be in decline, still is. The Stranger had gone from indie to establishment. Journalism as we knew it was dying. And standing at the funeral, suddenly there was an opportunity to right some wrongs, to stop begging for representation and trying to get a foothold into the mainstream. I took a chance.
Wow.
So it goes on from there, but I feel like that's enough.
That was great. And that book is coming out.
That book is coming out, I believe in September.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, we're just sending out the preview copies to folks to blurb the back.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So this was an exclusive then, having you hear that.
We're the first.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. You're breaking news here.
They're breaking right here. Yeah. So Reagan, we're at the top of the hour. So where can people find you? Where can people find your work?
Oh gosh. So my website is always under construction. So I'm hoping to have a better one soon. But in the meantime, it's REJJ Arts. Those are my initials. And then, yeah, you can buy my books at Barnes and Nobles or any other indie booksellers as well. Find me at the library.
And they have you're under your book sections there. You actually have basic all your books there, and they have hyperlinks to it to buy them from there.
They do. Those may or may not be updated. I'm bad at this, but that's okay. I'm gonna get better. That's my parting shot too. As much as I've learned, there's always more to learn.
That's right. So yeah, so check it out. So and and I'll put the link in the show notes as well for everybody. REJJarts.com. And through there, you can see her books. Also, they could probably, as you say, find your books on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and they'll do a search for Reagan Jackson, and it'll pop up. So, thank you very much, Reagan. This has been a wonderful hour, and I'm so glad to hear about all these. I knew about your children's books and I knew about your poetry, but I'm excited to read this romance novel now too.
Yeah, we'll see if that ever lives. But the young adult fiction novel, for sure, I'm going to push that hard because I've been working on that for so long.
That's cool. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Reagan.
Thanks. Take care, Barney.
Share, start a watch party. There we go.
Yeah, can you just invite me to your watch party and then does that tag me?
Yeah, if you go to my Facebook page now, you'll see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, technology. What? What is this about?
What is this about?
Oh, snap. Hi. We are live. It's happening.
It's happening.
It's you and me. Sierra, are you on here yet? No.